Rain hammered the city like it wanted to wash the sins straight off the pavement. Lolita T. Armstrong was already soaked to the bone, hoodie clinging to her skin, cheap sneakers squelching with every exhausted step. 11:30 on a Tuesday that felt like Friday the 13th. 8 hours on her feet at the campus café, another 4 cramming for midterms she could no longer afford to take. The shortcut home cut past a row of parked cars that definitely did not belong in this neighborhood. She never saw the black Mercedes Maybach until her side mirror kissed its flawless rear door with a sound like a fingernail dragged across a chalkboard. Long, ugly, expensive. 5 seconds. That was all it took to ruin everything. She froze under the orange streetlight, rain streaming off her lashes, heart punching against her ribs. The car was a matte black monster, tinted windows reflecting her pale, terrified face back at her. No plates on the front. No one around. Just rain and the low hum of a city that didn't care.
Run.
Get out of here. No cameras, no witnesses. But her mother's voice, soft, stubborn, dead 5 years now, whispered the same line it always did when life tried to break her. We don't take the easy way out, baby girl. Not ever. Lolita's hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped the pen. She ripped a page from the little notebook she used for study notes, pressed it against her wet thigh, and wrote in hurried, slanted letters. I'm so sorry. I scraped your car. My name is Lolita T. Armstrong. I don't have much, but I'll find a way to make this right. I swear. 555-738-2911. The ink bled where raindrops hit it. She folded the paper once, twice, and slid it under the wiper like she was leaving her future in an envelope. Then she ran, boots splashing, breath burning, until the Mercedes disappeared behind her. She told herself the knot in her chest would loosen once she was home. That honesty was armor. That maybe the owner would be some rich tech bro who'd laugh and tear the note up. She was wrong on every count. 2 hours later the rain had eased to a hiss. A convoy of 3 black SUVs rolled up the block in perfect silence and boxed the Maybach in. Doors opened. 4 men in long dark coats fanned out first, eyes scanning rooftops, hands inside jackets. Only then did the middle vehicle's rear door open. James C. Wells stepped onto the wet asphalt like he owned gravity itself. Black dress shirt, sleeves rolled once. No coat despite the cold. 6'3" easy, shoulders built for breaking doors and promises. The short buzz on the sides of his head gleamed under the streetlight. The scar that cut through his left eyebrow caught the glow like a warning. His second, Marco, started cursing the second he saw the foot-long white scar across the Maybach's flank. Somebody's got a death wish. You want the block canvassed? James didn't answer. He walked the length of the car slowly, fingertips brushing the damage like he could read the story in the paint. Then he saw the folded paper under the wiper. He plucked it free, unfolded it with deliberate care. Read it once. Read it again. The handwriting was messy, earnest, already smudged by rain. The name at the bottom hit him like a suppressed round, quiet, but he felt it in the chest. Lolita T. Armstrong. He knew that name. Knew those tired hazel eyes that always looked up too fast when someone raised their voice. Knew the girl who studied alone at the 24-hour café on 9th and Mercer until closing, earbuds in, giving her last muffin to the homeless vet who wandered in every Thursday. He folded the note once and slipped it into the inner pocket of his shirt, right over his heart, where nothing else ever went. Pull every camera on the street, he said, voice low, almost amused. I want to see her face when she wrote it. Marco blinked. Boss, it's just paint. James's gaze flicked up to the cafe sign 3 blocks down, its red neon bleeding into the wet night like a wound. No, he said softly. It's an invitation. He got back into the SUV, without another word. The fleet pulled away, taillights disappearing into the dark. By sunrise, he would have every second of footage. By noon, he would know where she lived, where she worked, what time she locked her apartment door with 2 deadbolts and still didn't sleep. Lolita T. Armstrong had just scratched the wrong car. And James C. Wells had just found the one honest thing in a city built on lies. He was going to make her pay. Just not with money. The convoy cut through the city like a blade, tires hissing over wet asphalt, streetlights strobing across James's face in pulses of gold and shadow. He sat in the back of the lead SUV, one elbow on the armrest, the folded note turning over and over between his fingers like a poker chip he couldn't decide whether to cash or keep. Marco rode shotgun up front, glancing at him in the rear view every 30 seconds. Finally, he couldn't stand the silence. "Boss, talk to me. A scratch on the Maybach and you're acting like somebody handed you a winning lottery ticket. Who is this girl?" James didn't answer right away. He was staring at the note again, thumb tracing the smudged ink where Rain had kissed her name. "Someone who still believes in consequences," he said at last, voice low. Marco snorted. "Consequences are what we sell, not what we buy." James almost smiled. Almost. They rolled into the private garage beneath the building everyone in the city simply called the Tower. 43 floors of glass and steel that looked like any other luxury high-rise from the outside. Inside, the top 8 belonged to James. Elevators that needed retinal scans. Hallways patrolled by men who could put 2 rounds in a quarter at 50 yards while chewing gum. By the time James reached the war room on 41, the footage was already cued on the 85-inch screen. His tech, a skinny kid named Eli who owed James his life twice over, stood nervously by the keyboard. 4 angles, boss. City traffic cam, the bodega across the street, 2 private feeds I borrowed. Clean copies, no trace. James waved him off. Roll it. The screen split into quarters. Midnight city rain. The Maybach glided in like a shark cutting black water. Then the small gray Honda, rust around the wheel wells, one taillight cracked, trying to parallel park in a spot 2 inches too narrow. James leaned forward. There she was. Lolita stepped out, hoodie soaked through, ponytail plastered to her neck. Even in grainy infrared, he could see her lips moving. No, no, no. Hands pressed to her mouth like she could push the sound of the scrape back into the night. She crouched, inspected the damage, stood up too fast, looked around like a deer that just heard the twig snap. Run, he thought, almost willing it. Just get in her car and disappear. She didn't. Instead, she dug through her soaked bag, found the notebook, wrote the note with shaking hands, placed it under the wiper like she was leaving an offering to a very angry god. James hit pause. The frozen image of her face, eyes wide, mouth parted, rain dripping from her lashes, filled the screen. He remembered her now. Not just the cafe. The exact night. 3 weeks ago. 2:30 in the morning. He'd come in after a sit-down that left 2 bodies in the river, needing coffee strong enough to burn the taste of gunpowder out of his mouth. The place was almost empty. Old man in the corner booth, Vietnam vet jacket 2 sizes too big, staring at an empty soup bowl like it had personally betrayed him. James had watched from the shadows while Lolita, name tag crooked, apron stained, slid her own untouched bowl across the table to the vet. "I messed up the order," she'd lied softly. "Kitchen's closing. You be doing me a favor." The old man had tried to pay. She'd closed his gnarled fingers back around the crumpled 5. "Next time," she'd said and meant it. James had left a $100 bill under his saucer and walked out without a word. Now here she was, same tired eyes, same stubborn mouth, signing her own warrant with a cheap pen in the rain. Marco cleared his throat. "You're smiling. That's new." James killed the smile before it fully formed. "Find out everything. Where she lives, works, studies, debts, family, ex-boyfriends, parking tickets. I want it before sunrise." That's a deep dive for a fender bender. "It's not the fender," James said. "It's the note." Marco waited. When nothing else came, he sighed. "Yes, boss." Across town, in a 3rd-floor walk-up that smelled like old curry and regret, Lolita finally got the deadbolt to catch on the 4th try. She dropped her keys in the bowl, really just a chipped cereal bowl, kicked off her ruined sneakers, and stood in the middle of the tiny studio like she wasn't sure what country she was in. The silence pressed in. She peeled off wet clothes, left them in a pile, and stood under a shower that never quite got hot. The water ran over her shoulders, and she watched the drain like it might spit out answers. How much to fix a Maybach? 10,000? 20? She made $11 an hour plus tips that barely covered ramen. She toweled off, pulled on an old college sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, because it used to be her dad's, and sat cross-legged on the floor counting change. $37.82 in the rent jar. The electric bill was already red on the envelope. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She stared at it until it went to voicemail, heart jackhammering. It's not him. Nobody calls at 1 a.m. about a scratch. Calm down. She curled up on the futon that doubled as her bed, pulled the blanket to her chin, and tried to breathe. Sleep came in pieces. She dreamed of the silent man in black stepping out of the shadows, face hidden under the streetlight, reaching for the note with long fingers. In the dream, he unfolded it, read it, then looked straight up at some invisible camera and smiled with too many teeth. She woke gasping at 4:17 a.m., blanket twisted around her legs, mouth dry. The room was dark except for the streetlight bleeding orange through the blinds. It's fine. You did the right thing. People aren't monsters. But the city outside her window felt different now. Like something ancient had opened its eyes and was listening for her footsteps. James never went to bed. By 5:30, he had a folder on the screen that would have made the NSA jealous. Lolita T. Armstrong, 23. Born in Queens, father deceased, heart attack after medical debt foreclosure. Interesting. Mother gone 5 years prior, overdose. Full ride to NYU revoked sophomore year, when the funding dried up. Currently carrying $38,000 in student loans, working 2 jobs, barista at Ground-Up Café on 9th and Mercer, night stock at a 24-hour pharmacy 3 blocks from her apartment. GPA still 3.8 because she studied in the cafe until they kicked her out at closing. No boyfriend. No social media newer than 2 years. 1 parking ticket unpaid. And every Thursday night for the last 4 months, she sat in the exact same booth at Ground-Up with color-coded flashcards and the cheapest black coffee on the menu. James closed the file. He knew exactly where she'd be tonight. He showered, changed into a charcoal Henley and black jeans, casual enough not to scare the civilians, expensive enough that no one would mistake him for one, and drove himself. No driver. No security. The Maybach stayed in the garage. He took the matte black G-Wagon instead. He arrived at Ground-Up just after 10. The rain had stopped, leaving the city steaming. The cafe smelled like burnt espresso and lemon cleaner. Only 4 customers, a couple of night shift nurses, a guy asleep on his laptop, and Lolita. She was in the corner booth, headphones in, highlighters lined up like soldiers. Hair twisted up in a messy knot, glasses sliding down her nose. She hadn't seen him yet. James ordered a large black coffee from the bored kid at the counter, left a 50 in the tip jar, and took the booth 2 away from hers, close enough to watch, far enough that she wouldn't bolt. He opened a dummy file on his phone and pretended to read. Every few minutes, she'd push her glasses up, bite her lower lip the way she did when she was concentrating, and mouth the words on the flashcard like they might escape if she didn't pin them down. 11:15. The nurses left. 11:40. Laptop guy started snoring. 11:58. The barista started stacking chairs. Lolita looked up, startled, like she'd lost 3 hours. She closed her books slowly, stacked them with care, slipped them into a backpack that had seen better decades. James waited until she stood, slinging the bag over one shoulder, and turned toward the door. Then he moved. Not fast. Not threatening. Just enough that he was suddenly in her path, blocking the narrow aisle between tables. Her eyes snapped up. Hazel, bloodshot, beautiful, and recognition hit her like a slap. It was him. The man from the street. The one who'd watched her like she was already dead. Every ounce of color drained from her face. She started, voice cracking. James tilted his head, studying her the way a wolf studies a rabbit that just realized the field has no exit. Lolita Armstrong, he said, soft enough that only she could hear. We need to talk about your note. Her backpack slid off her shoulder and hit the floor with a dull thud. Outside, the city held its breath. And somewhere in the shadows across the street, a man with a telephoto lens lowered his camera and smiled. Carter Vance had just found James Wells' weakness. And weaknesses in their world had a way of bleeding. The bell above the door of Ground Up Café didn't just chime that afternoon. It died. One moment the place was humming in its usual half-dead weekday rhythm, indie playlist crackling through blown speakers, the hiss of the milk steamer, two college freshmen arguing about Kant in the corner. The next moment, every sound got sucked into a vacuum. James C. Wells stepped over the threshold like the temperature had personally offended him. Black wool coat open, black shirt beneath it stretched across a chest that looked forged rather than born. Two men followed him in Marco and a stone-faced wall of muscle everyone just called Bishop, both in tailored suits that didn't bother hiding the guns. Conversation evaporated. The barista froze mid-latte art. The freshmen's mouths hung open like broken hinges. The bell above the door of Ground Up Café didn't just chime that afternoon. It died. One moment the place was humming in its usual half-dead weekday rhythm, indie playlist crackling through blown speakers, the hiss of the milk steamer, two college freshmen arguing about Kant in the corner. The next moment, every sound got sucked into a vacuum. James C. Wells stepped over the threshold like the temperature had personally offended him. Black wool coat open, black shirt beneath it stretched across a chest that looked forged rather than born. Two men followed him in Marco and a stone-faced wall of muscle everyone just called Bishop, both in tailored suits that didn't bother hiding the guns. Conversation evaporated. The barista froze mid-latte art. The freshmen's mouths hung open like broken hinges. Lolita was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with a rag that suddenly felt too small in her hands. She felt him before she saw him. The way prey feels the shift in air pressure when the hawk finally circles overhead. Her stomach dropped through the floor. He knew where she worked. Of course he did. She'd written it on the damn note. James didn't scan the room like a normal person. He simply walked forward, and the world rearranged itself around him. Customers found sudden reasons to stare at their laptops. The barista, Josh, sophomore, philosophy major, terrified, took one look at the three men and vanished into the back like smoke. James stopped at the counter, close enough that Lolita could smell the cold on his coat and something darker underneath. Cedar, gun oil, money. Lolita Armstrong, he said, voice low and smooth, like he was tasting her name for the first time and liked the flavor. Every self-preservation instinct screamed at her to run. There was a service door behind the pastry case. She could be out in the alley in 4 seconds. Instead, her feet stayed rooted, rag clenched in white knuckles. I can explain about the car, she started, voice cracking like thin ice. James tilted his head, the tiniest movement. You already did. He reached into his inner coat pocket, slow, deliberate, and pulled out the folded note she'd left under his wiper 2 nights ago. The paper was pristine now, like it had never seen rain. I'm here about payment. The word payment landed between them like a loaded gun. Lolita swallowed. How much is it? $28,412, he said without blinking. That's parts, labor, and the custom paint match. Give or take. The rag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a wet slap. $28,000. She made $19,000 last year before taxes. She had $311 in her checking account and a jar of quarters on her fridge. I can't, her voice cracked again. I'll set up a payment plan. Whatever shop you use, I'll call them. No. The single syllable cut her off cleaner than a blade. James leaned one elbow on the counter, close enough now that she could see the faint scar slicing through his left eyebrow, the flecks of gold in otherwise storm-gray eyes. Here are your options, Lolita. He said her name like it belonged to him now. Option 1. You pay the $28,412. Today. He let that sit. Let her feel the weight of impossible. Option 2. He continued, voice softening just enough to make it more terrifying. You come work for me until the debt is square. You'll be paid fairly. You'll be safe. And when it's done, you walk away clean. Safe. The word tasted like a lie in her mouth. She tried to laugh. It came out strangled. Work for you doing what, exactly? Whatever I need. His gaze flicked over her face, unreadable. Filing. Coffee. Watching my back when I'm too busy watching everyone else's knife. One of the freshmen in the corner made a tiny squeaking sound. Lolita's pulse hammered so hard she could barely hear her own voice. And if I say no? James straightened. The air got heavier. Then I walk out that door, and you never see me again, he said. But the bill still comes due. And the people I send to collect won't be as polite as I am. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even raising his voice. That was the worst part. It wasn't a threat, it was gravity. Inevitable. She looked around the cafe for help that wasn't coming. Josh was still hiding. Customers stared at their shoes. Marco stood by the door like a statue carved from bad decisions. Lolita felt the last piece of her old life snap off and fall away. I'll do it, she whispered. James gave a single nod, as if he'd known the answer before he walked in. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. He slid a matte black business card across the counter. No name, just an address in the warehouse district and a phone number. Don't make me come find you. He turned to leave. Stopped. Looked back. And Lolita? His voice dropped, almost gentle. Don't run. You won't like what happens if I have to chase. Then he was gone. The bell gave a pathetic jingle. The door shut. The cafe exhaled like it had been holding its breath for years. Lolita stood there shaking until her knees buckled, and she had to grip the counter to stay upright. She had 24 hours to say goodbye to the life she used to have. She spent most of them vomiting. The next morning, she stood outside a converted brick warehouse on the edge of the river that looked abandoned until you noticed the cameras tracking every breath. 8 stories tall, windows blacked out, a single steel door with no handle. She wore her only clean blouse. White, secondhand, ironed twice, and the least ripped pair of black jeans she owned. Hair twisted up in a knot that already felt too tight. Her hand hovered over the intercom. This is insane. Call the police. Call someone. But who do you call when the monster already knows your name? She pressed the button. The door slid open silently. Inside was not what she expected. Polished concrete floors. Exposed brick warmed by hidden lighting. A reception desk that looked like it cost more than her entire apartment building. Behind it sat a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a smile sharp enough to shave with. Miss Armstrong, the woman said without looking at a screen. Mr. Wells is expecting you. Elevator on the left. Top floor. Don't wander. The elevator had no buttons. It simply knew. When the doors opened again, she stepped into a world of dark wood, glass, and the low hum of absolute power. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, like a throne. Men in suits moved with purpose, voices low, eyes flicking to her and away again. James stood at the far end, back to her, on the phone in a language she didn't recognize. He ended the call with a single word and turned. Today he wore a charcoal sweater that clung to every line of muscle and black slacks that probably cost more than her rent for a year. No coat. No bodyguards in sight. He looked almost human. Almost. You came, he said. I didn't think I had a choice. A flicker of something crossed his face. Approval, maybe. Everyone has a choice. You just made the smart one. He gestured to a desk in the corner of the massive open space. Brand new MacBook, stack of files, a vase with fresh white peonies that smelled like money. You'll work here. Close enough that I can see you. Far enough that you can pretend you still have privacy. He walked her through the first day like it was normal. Sort these invoices by date. Shred anything marked red. Transcribe the audio from this drive. Headphones are in the drawer. Coffee is in the kitchen. Don't go in the room with the frosted glass. The tasks were mind-numbing. Secretaries with guns brought her files and took them away again. No one spoke to her directly, except to grunt thanks. And James was always there. Not obviously. But every time she looked up, his eyes were on her, reading her face like a balance sheet. At noon a tray appeared on her desk, grilled salmon, asparagus, sparkling water. No note. She hadn't ordered anything. She ate because she was starving and because refusing felt like a battle she wasn't ready for. At 4:30, the frosted glass door opened and a man was dragged in by Marco and Bishop. Mid-40s, sweating through his cheap suit, nose already bleeding. "Please, Mr. Wells, I just need another week." James didn't look up from his screen. "You had 6. I've got a buyer for the shipment, I swear." James stood. The room went still. He walked over slowly, picked up a stainless steel letter opener from a nearby desk, and pressed the tip beneath the man's chin until blood beaded. "Next time you're late," James said conversationally, "I take something you can't grow back." The man sobbed, nodded, was dragged out. Lolita's lunch turned to stone in her stomach. James wiped the letter opener on a handkerchief, set it down exactly where it had been, and glanced at her. "You okay?" The question was so normal it was surreal. She couldn't finish. I just reminded him of the rules. He walked over, crouched in front of her chair, so they were eye level. "This world has teeth, Lolita. I don't make the rules. I just enforce them better than anyone else." His hand brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, gentle, almost tender. The same hand that had just held a blade to a man's throat. She flinched. He noticed. Dropped his hand. "Clock out at 6, he said quietly. "I'll drive you home. I can walk." It wasn't a request. That became the pattern. Days bled into each other. She organized ledgers that didn't quite add up. Transcribed conversations in code she didn't understand. Learned which men smiled and which ones made her skin crawl. And James was always there, watching, correcting her gently when she misfiled something, bringing her coffee exactly the way she liked it, oat milk, 1 sugar, even though she'd never told him, standing too close when he leaned over her shoulder to point at a screen. The first time he drove her home, she sat rigid in the passenger seat of a different black SUV, hands clenched in her lap. He didn't speak until they were parked outside her building. "You don't have to be scared of me," he said into the silence. "I'm not scared of you," she lied. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression cracked open for just a second. "You should be," he said softly, "but not for the reasons you think." Then he got out, opened her door, and waited on the sidewalk until she was safely inside. Every night after that, he drove her. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Sometimes he asked about her classes, her old scholarship, the way her father used to make pancakes on Sundays before the medical bills ate him alive. And slowly, terrifyingly, she started answering. She saw the other side of him in fragments. The way he spoke Italian to his grandmother on the phone, voice soft as cashmere. The way he slipped a thick envelope to the widow of a soldier who died for him. The way he noticed when she hadn't eaten and left containers of homemade lasagna on her desk with a post-it that just said eat. The man who could order a beating without raising his voice also memorized how she took her coffee. It was madness. It was magnetic. 3 weeks in, she realized she hadn't vomited once since starting. That she slept better knowing he was downstairs waiting. That when his hand brushed hers passing a file, electricity shot straight to her spine. She hated herself for it. She hated him less every day. Carter Vance noticed the change before anyone else. He noticed everything. He was beautiful in the way poison is beautiful. Blonde hair always perfectly styled. Blue eyes that smiled while they calculated how best to gut you. A British tailored suit on a body that spent as much time in the gym as it did burying problems. He ran the docks, the pills, half the politicians downtown. And he had been circling James's empire, like a shark smelling blood in the water for years. One slow Tuesday, Lolita was covering an extra shift at Ground Up because rent was due and James had insisted she keep the cafe job. "You need normal," he'd said, which was insane coming from him. The bell chimed. Carter Vance walked in alone. No bodyguards. No pretense of danger. Just a charming smile and a voice like expensive scotch. "Lolita, isn't it?" he said, reading her name tag with theatrical surprise. "I've heard so much about you." She froze, milk pitcher in hand. He slid onto a stool at the counter, like he owned the place. Large cappuccino, extra foam, and 5 minutes of your time. I'm working. I can wait. He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. James has been keeping you very busy lately. The way he said James's name made her skin crawl. She made his drink on autopilot. Set it in front of him. He wrapped both hands around the cup like they were old friends. Tell me, Lolita, he said softly, do you know what happens to pretty things in our world when they stop being useful? Her blood turned to ice. I don't. Of course you don't. He sipped, sighed theatrically. James collects broken toys. Fixes them just enough to play with. Then discards them when the shine wears off. You're shining very brightly right now. Enjoy it while it lasts. He left $100 bill under the saucer and stood. Oh, and if you ever want to know what he's really keeping you around for? He slipped a black card across the counter. Same matte finish as James's, but with a different number. Call me, day or night. Then he was gone, leaving only the scent of expensive cologne and terror. That night when James picked her up, she was quiet. Too quiet. He noticed immediately. What happened? Nothing. Lolita. She told him. Every word. The card burned in her pocket like a brand. James's hands tightened on the steering wheel hard enough that the leather creaked. He didn't say anything until they were parked outside her building. Stay in the car, he ordered Marco, who had been driving tonight. Then he turned to her, and for the first time she saw genuine fury in his eyes. Not the cold, controlled kind he used on business, but something raw and violent. Carter Vance is a dead man walking, he said very quietly. He touched what's mine. The possessive note in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, something warm and treacherous bloomed in her chest. I'm not yours, she whispered. James looked at her for a long moment. You're wrong, he said. You have been since the night you left your name in the rain. He reached across the console, cupped her face with one large hand, thumb brushing her cheekbone like she was made of glass, and kissed her. Not gentle, not asking permission, claiming. She kissed him back before her brain caught up. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I will burn the city down before I let him near you again, he promised against her lips. And for the first time since the scrape of metal on metal that changed everything, Lolita believed someone when they said they'd keep her safe. She just wasn't sure yet what the price would be. The words drifted down the hallway like smoke under a door. The girl is leverage. Vance will use her if we don't lock it down first. Lolita's hand froze on the stack of freshly printed shipping manifests she was carrying to James's office. She had been hurrying, late after staying too long watching him on a call, watching the way his mouth softened when he spoke Italian to someone he clearly loved, the way his fingers drummed the desk when he was angry but holding it in. She had started to believe the softness was for her. She was wrong. Two of his men, Rico and a newer guy whose name she never caught, stood half-hidden by the frosted glass partition that separated the bullpen from the private corridor. They didn't see her. They never saw her unless James told them to. Boss is getting sloppy, Rico muttered. Keeping her this close? Vance smells blood. Girl's the perfect opening. Innocent. Clean. Vance will snatch her the second she steps outside the perimeter. Lolita's heart stopped, then restarted at triple speed. Leverage. Opening. Snatch. Every moment of the last 5 weeks flashed behind her eyes in merciless high definition. The first terrifying café confrontation, the gentle way he tucked her hair behind her ear after threatening a man's life, the night he kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning for years. All of it calculated. She was bait. She backed away soundlessly, manifests clutched to her chest like a shield, and slipped into the ladies' room no one ever used. Locked the door, pressed her spine to the cold tile, and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. The tears came silent and furious. Stupid. 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 Of course a man like James C. Wells didn't fall for a broke college dropout who sideswiped his car. Men like him collected weaknesses the way other people collected watches. She was just the newest shiny one. She thought of Carter Vance's voice in the cafe. Smooth, poisonous, certain. James collects broken toys, discards them when the shine wears off. She had defended James to Vance in her own mind that night. Had chosen to believe the man who brought her dinner when she forgot to eat, who asked about her father's old jazz records, who kissed her forehead when she fell asleep on his office couch at 2 a.m. She had let herself fall in love with a lie. The decision crystallized in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She couldn't stay. Not one more hour. She waited until the floor quieted for the evening shift change. Slipped out through the service elevator James had once shown her in case of emergencies. The guards at the loading dock barely glanced up. She was the boss's girl now, invisible in a different way. Outside, the November wind cut straight through her thin coat. She kept her head down, took 3 buses in zigzag patterns, used cash for everything. At Port Authority, she bought a Greyhound ticket to anywhere with the last of her tip money, then didn't get on the bus. Instead, she walked until her legs gave out and checked into the Blue Star Motor Lodge off the Jersey Turnpike. $48 a night, cash, no ID required, flickering neon sign promising color TV and hourly rates. The room smelled like mildew and old cigarettes. She locked the door, chained it, dragged the dresser in front of it for good measure. Then she sat on the lumpy bed fully dressed and stared at the phone in her hand. James had given her a burner weeks ago. For emergencies, he'd said, closing her fingers over it. Only my number. If you ever need me, I'll come. She turned it over and over, thumb hovering. Then she pried the back off, pulled the battery, and dropped both pieces into the toilet tank. She was done being leverage. Across the river, James noticed her absence in pieces. First, the manifests never arrived. Then her desk sat too still. No quiet typing, no occasional sigh when numbers didn't add up, no soft humming under her breath when she thought no one was listening. He stepped out of a conference call at 8:17 p.m., looked at the empty corner, and felt something cold crawl up his spine. Marco. His second was already moving. On it. Security footage showed her leaving through the service exit at 6:42 p.m. alone. Backpack slung over one shoulder, face pale, eyes red. James watched the loop 6 times. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He called her regular phone, straight to voicemail. The burner, nothing. By midnight, every man he had was on the street. By 2 a.m. they'd traced the buses, the fake ticket purchase, the walk away from Port Authority. By 4 a.m. James stood in her tiny apartment staring at the rent jar still full of quarters, the futon still made from this morning, the lasagna he'd left in her fridge 2 nights ago untouched. She hadn't come home. He felt panic for the first time since he was 14 years old and watched his father bleed out on a warehouse floor. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Find her, he said, and the city trembled. At 6:03 a.m. the motel door exploded inward. Lolita came awake screaming, kicking, fighting with everything she had. A hand clamped over her mouth, chloroform sweet rag. Another pinned her wrists. She bit down hard, tasted blood, heard a man swear. Then the world tilted and went black. When she opened her eyes again, she was zip-tied to a metal chair in a cavernous warehouse that smelled of rust and river water. Industrial lights buzzed overhead. Her head throbbed. Her mouth tasted like copper and chemicals. Carter Vance stood 10 feet away, rolling the sleeves of a pristine white shirt, smiling like they were old friends. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said pleasantly. "You're a harder girl to invite to breakfast than I expected." She jerked against the ties. The plastic cut deep. "Let me go." "Afraid I can't do that." He walked a slow circle around her chair. "See, you left James's protection. That makes you fair game. And I've been dying to have a conversation." He pulled a second chair over, straddled it backward, rested his forearms on the backrest. Up close, he was even more beautiful than she remembered, blonde hair catching the light, blue eyes bright as broken glass. "Ask me anything," he said. "I'm an open book." She spat blood at his shoes. He laughed, delighted. "That's the spirit. James always did like them feisty." "Don't say his name," she hissed. "Oh, but I have to." This is about him after all. Vance leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Did he ever tell you about your father, Lolita? The world narrowed to a pinpoint. What about my father? Vance's smile widened. September 22nd, 8 years ago. A warehouse in Red Hook. Your dad owed some very bad men a lot of money, medical bills, right? They were going to take it out of his kneecaps. Maybe worse. She couldn't breathe. You're lying. Am I? He pulled out his phone, thumbed through photos, turned the screen to her. A grainy still from a security camera, her father on his knees, 2 men looming. And in the shadows behind them, arms crossed, face half hidden but unmistakable, James Wells. 25 years old, colder than he was now, watching. Lolita made a sound like a wounded animal. He was there, Vance said softly. He watched them break your father. Didn't lift a finger. That heart attack 6 months later? Stress does terrible things, doesn't it? Tears blurred the photo, but the image was already burned into her brain. Everything she'd felt for James turned to ash in her mouth. He kept you close because you were a loose end, Vance continued, relentless. A walking reminder of a debt he never bothered to settle. And now you're going to help me settle a few of my own. He stood, brushed imaginary dust from his trousers. Take her to the cage, he told the 2 men lurking in the shadows. We'll start with something simple. Fingernails, maybe. James always had a soft spot for pretty hands. The guards moved in. Lolita screamed until her voice shredded. Somewhere across the river, James was already coming, guns loaded, city burning behind him, terror in his heart for the first time in a decade. But he was hours too late. The warehouse door clanged shut, and the darkness swallowed her whole. The first explosion wasn't loud. It was surgical, a shaped charge on the loading door that turned steel into confetti and night into white fire. Then the second, third, and fourth went off in perfect sequence, collapsing Vance's outer perimeter like a house of cards built by a coward. James didn't walk in. He arrived. 6 SUVs screamed up the dock in a black wedge, doors flying open before they even stopped. 20 men in plate carriers poured out, suppressed rifles already barking. Flashbangs turned the warehouse into a strobe-lit nightmare. Vance's outer guards dropped before they cleared leather. James moved at the center of the storm. No vest, black shirt rolled to the elbows, Sig Sauer in one hand, the other already reaching for her. His face was carved from rage and terror in equal measure. He had not slept, had not eaten, had only one image burned behind his eyes, Lolita tied to a chair, bleeding because he had failed to keep her safe. Marco's voice crackled in his earpiece. East side clear. 2 tangos down. Bishop on the west. Breaching inner ring, go. James didn't answer. He was already moving. Inside, the air was thick with cordite and screaming. Vance's men fired wild from catwalks and behind crates. James's moved like ghosts, 2-round bursts. Advance, repeat. Bodies hit concrete like dropped meat. Lolita heard the chaos through layers of terror and duct tape. The zip ties had cut grooves into her wrists. Blood made the plastic slick. Vance had left her alone with 2 guards and the promise of pliers in 5 minutes. She rocked the chair hard. Once, twice. Felt it teeter. A stray round shattered the overhead light above her, showering sparks. 1 guard spun toward the noise. She threw her weight sideways with everything she had. The chair toppled. Her shoulder hit the ground hard enough to jolt stars across her vision, but the impact cracked one of the wooden slats. She twisted, frantic, sawing the zip tie against the jagged edge. Come on, come on. Another explosion. Closer. The whole building shuddered. Then she heard him. Lolita. His voice cut through gunfire like a blade. She would know it anywhere. Would know it in hell. She screamed his name. Raw, shredded, the sound of someone who had already started grieving. James saw her the same second Vance did. Vance had been watching from the mezzanine office, calm as a surgeon, waiting to see how many of James's men he could bleed before the end. When the tide turned too fast, he descended the metal stairs with the lazy confidence of a man who always had an exit. He reached Lolita first, grabbed her by the hair, yanked her up as a shield. The chair fragments clattered away. Cold gun metal pressed under her jaw. James froze 20 feet away, gun raised, chest heaving. "Drop it," Vance called, almost cheerful. "Or I repaint the wall with her." James's men fanned out, weapons trained, but no one had a clean shot. Not with her in the way. James lowered the cig. "Let it fall." "Take me instead," he said. Voice steady. Eyes only on her. Lolita was shaking so hard her teeth chattered against the barrel. Tears cut clean tracks through the blood and grime on her face. Vance laughed. Still the hero. How tediously predictable. He shifted the gun, just an inch, lining it up with James's chest. Time slowed to syrup. Lolita saw his finger tighten. She did the only thing she could. She drove her elbow back into Vance's solar plexus, twisted hard, and dropped her full weight. The gun roared. James was already moving, faster than physics should allow, throwing himself forward, arms wide. The bullet took him high in the chest, left side, spinning him half around. He hit the ground on top of her, heavy, hot, blood already soaking through his shirt and onto her skin. Silence fell like a guillotine. Vance swore, raised the gun for the kill shot. Marco's rifle coughed twice from the catwalk. Vance's shoulder exploded red. The pistol clattered away. He staggered, eyes wide with genuine shock, then bolted for the side exit as James's men swarmed. Lolita couldn't see any of it. All she could see was James's face inches from hers, gray eyes locked on her, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Hey," he whispered, trying to smile. "Hey, baby. I got you." She screamed his name, hands scrambling over the wetness spreading across his chest. "No, no, no, James, stay with me." He cupped her cheek with a shaking hand, smearing red across her skin like war paint. "I tried to stay away from you," he rasped. "First time I saw you give that old man your soup, I knew you were the only good thing in my line of sight. Should have stayed away. Couldn't." His eyes started to unfocus. "I love you," she sobbed, pressing both hands over the hole in his chest like she could hold his life in with willpower alone. "Don't you dare leave me, you bastard, I love you." His fingers found hers, squeezed once, weak but deliberate. "Love you more," he breathed. Then his eyes fluttered shut, and his hand went slack. She screamed until her voice gave out. Marco dropped beside them, pressing a trauma pack to the wound, barking orders she couldn't understand. Hands lifted James, careful, fast, onto a stretcher that appeared from nowhere. Someone cut her remaining ties. She tried to follow, and her legs buckled. Strong arms caught her. Bishop, maybe, and carried her out into the cold night where red and blue lights were already painting the docks, sirens howling closer. She didn't remember the ride to the hospital. Only the blood on her hands. Only the way James's chest barely rose and fell under the paramedic's hands. Only the words she kept repeating like a prayer. "Don't take him. Not him. Please." They wheeled him straight into surgery. Trauma 1. Gunshot wound to the upper left chest, through and through, nicked the subclavian artery. Massive blood loss. Lolita stood in the waiting room in borrowed scrubs, James's blood drying cracked and stiff on her skin, and refused to sit. She refused to blink. Refused to believe the universe would be cruel enough to give her him, really give him, only to rip him away the second she admitted she couldn't live without him. Hours bled into each other. At 4:47 a.m. the surgeon came out, mask down, face unreadable. She couldn't breathe. "He's stable," the woman said. "We got the bleeder. Transfused 6 units. He's in ICU. He's asking for someone named Lolita." She ran. They let her in because she looked like she would fight God if they didn't. James looked small in the bed. Tubes everywhere. Monitors beeping slow and steady. Skin gray against the white sheets. But his eyes, those storm gray eyes, opened the second she stepped through the door. She crossed the room in 3 strides and took the hand that wasn't tethered to IVs. "You absolute idiot," she whispered, tears falling onto his knuckles. "You promised you'd come for me, and then you almost died doing it." He tried to smile, winced, voice barely audible. Had to keep the promise. She pressed her forehead to his hand and cried like a child. When the tears slowed, he tugged weakly until she climbed carefully onto the bed beside him, curling against his good side. "Lolita," he rasped. "Listen."
No.
"You rest. Listen." His fingers tightened. "I'm done." She stilled. "I'm out. The life. The empire. All of it." His voice cracked. "Your honesty, that night in the rain, it broke something in me. Showed me what I could be if I wasn't this." He gestured weakly at the monitors, the blood. "I want mornings with you. I want stupid fights about whose turn it is to do dishes. I want to watch you finish that damn degree and never worry about rent again." She was crying again, but quieter now. "I ran because I heard them call me leverage," she confessed into his shoulder. "And then Vance showed me that photo, my dad." James's face twisted with guilt and fury. "I was there to stop them," he said fiercely. "I was 25. I paid your father's debt that night. Paid the hospital. Paid everything.
He never knew it was me.
I stayed away because men like me, we ruin what we touch. I thought if I stayed away, you'd be safe." She stared at him, tears still falling. "I love you," she said simply. "I hated you for making me love you. And then I thought I lost you, and I couldn't breathe." He pulled her closer, wincing at the pain but not letting go. "Marry me," he whispered against her hair. "When I'm out of here. Marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of that note you left in the rain." She laughed through the tears. Wet, broken, perfect. "Yes," she said, "but only if you never take another bullet for me." "Deal." He lied, because they both knew he would do it again in a heartbeat. Outside the window, dawn crept over the city. Soft gold on glass towers and dirty streets alike. Inside, monitors beeped steady and strong. And somewhere in the shadows, Carter Vance nursed a shattered shoulder and a vendetta that would not die quietly. James felt the shift in the air the way animals feel earthquakes coming. He tightened his hand around hers. "I won't let him touch you again," he said, voice steel wrapped in velvet. "Whatever it takes." Lolita looked up at him, eyes fierce and unafraid for the first time since the night metal scraped metal. "Then we face it together." She sealed the promise with a kiss, soft, careful of wires and wounds, but unbreakable. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, they would fight it side by side. And the city, that cruel, glittering, blood-soaked city, held its breath to see who would bleed last.